I could hear the heart monitor blipping beside me, each uneven chirp reminding me how fragile I'd suddenly become. The cold in the hospital room felt like it seeped into my bones. The nurse had dimmed the lights, but even in the haze, I could see the reflection of my pale face against the window. If this story touched your heart, friends, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more touching stories. Thank you for being here. It was 1:47 a.m. when the doctor told me something I never imagined I'd hear. Your sons said they can't come. Not won't, not later, just can't. As if my life depended on something as casual as their convenience. He had called them right after I was stabilized. He told them I'd had a severe cardiac collapse. Not 1, 2 stoppages of my heart in the ambulance. For 4 minutes, I hadn't existed. And while the doctors fought to bring me back, my sons were 30 minutes away, attending a themed dinner their wives had been planning for weeks. Your mother may not make it through the night, the doctor had emphasized. And my eldest, Daniel, responded, "We already have over 50 guests here. Leaving now would ruin everything." My youngest, Aaron, added, "She's strong. She always bounces back. She'll be fine until morning." Until morning? As if life politely waits? The irony burned deeper than the pain in my chest. After 66 years of standing up for them, they couldn't spare a single hour for me? Nurse Lila, a young woman with soft brown eyes, checked my IV. "Tried relax," she whispered gently. "Stress will make it worse." Relax. How do you relax when your heart isn't the only thing that's failing? As I lay there, I began remembering the moments that shaped me into the mother I had been because I needed to understand how I ended up here, completely alone while my sons toasted champagne at a rooftop party. I remembered when their father walked on us, leaving me with 2 boys, overdue bills, and shelves of half-empty pantry items. I took every job that would pay. Early shifting at a bakery, afternoon shifts at a laundromat, and sewing until my eyes blurred at night. My hands still carry tiny scars from the needle slips during those exhausted sewing nights. Every dollar I saved went into my son's futures. Music lessons for Aaron, therapy for Daniel's childhood anxiety, tutoring sessions, new shoes, healthy food. I made do with trinkets and thrift store clothes. They had everything I never had. I remembered selling the small cottage they grew up in, the home that smelled of cinnamon and old books, to help Daniel put a down payment on his forever home. It wasn't a loan. I had called it a gift he barely thanked me for. I remembered giving Aaron the last of my retirement savings to help stabilize his business. He insisted it was a guaranteed investment. 3 months later, the company folded. These things didn't bother me then. I told myself that a mother's heart was stronger than any setback. But yesterday proved something terrifying. Maybe my sons had mistaken my resilience for being unbreakable. Maybe I had taught them too well that I could handle everything. Now, lying in this dark room, I realized something else. They had stopped seeing me as someone who could die. A sharp pain tightened around my ribs, worse than before. Lila rushed over. "Your pressure is climbing again," she murmured. "Tell me what you're thinking about." If only I could tell her I was thinking about decades of unconditional love returned with indifference. And just when I thought I had run out of tears, one warm drop slid down my cheek because I suddenly understood this night wasn't just a medical crisis. It was the moment I realized that something inside me, something far deeper than my heart, had finally cracked. But I had no idea that what would happen the next morning would shatter the last illusion I had about my sons and push me toward a decision that would change all of our lives forever. By sunrise, I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the doctor's words replayed in my mind like a cruel echo. They said they can come tomorrow, after the event. Tomorrow. As if mothers come with a pause button. The morning shift nurse, Clara, checked on me right before breakfast. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with a calmness that made you feel seen. She straightened the blanket around me and asked, "Any family coming today?" I hesitated. "My sons. They said they're busy." She paused, studying my expression. "Busy enough to miss a medical crisis?" Her tone wasn't judgmental. It was the kind of tone someone uses when they already know the truth but gently waits for you to accept it. I didn't answer, and she didn't push. When she left, I turned toward the window. Outside, people were walking their dogs, going for early runs, laughing as if everything in the world made sense. Life moved forward without waiting for anyone. I could feel another wave of emotion knotting in my throat. I pressed my hand against my chest, not where my heart hurt physically, but where it ached emotionally. A soft knock came at the door. It was Dr. Hale, the cardiologist, young but with tired eyes that told me he'd seen more life-and-death moments than most people twice his age. "Good morning, Mrs. Rowan," he greeted. "We need to talk about last night." I nodded weakly. "You had 2 cardiac stoppages. You were gone for nearly 3 minutes during the second one. We were fortunate to bring you back." Fortunate. As if luck, not love, had kept me alive. He glanced at the empty visitor's chair. "Did your sons come by this morning?" The silence answered for me. He exhaled softly. "I spoke to both of them last night. I emphasized the severity. They agreed to call in the morning, but they haven't." I swallowed hard. "Did they say anything else?" He hesitated. Doctors aren't supposed to reveal these things, but I think he sensed something in me breaking. "Well," he said quietly, "one of them mentioned they couldn't leave because the event was being live-streamed and their absence would draw attention." I closed my eyes. So, even public perception mattered more than whether I lived to see another day. "Mrs. Rowan," he continued gently, "I'm going to be honest. Stress like this can trigger another cardiac event. You need emotional stability just as much as medical care." Emotional stability. How do you find stability when the foundation of your life, your children, has already crumbled? After he left, I reached for my phone, unsure why. Habit, maybe. Or hope. There were no missed calls, not a single message, not even a simple, "Are you okay, Mom?" And so I did something I never thought I would. I scrolled back through old photos. Daniel at age 6 wearing a Halloween costume made from cardboard because I couldn't afford store-bought ones. Aaron at 12 holding the guitar I bought by pawning my wedding ring. Us at their school awards, me standing behind them with pride so radiant it almost looked out of place now. Looking at those moments felt like watching a stranger's life, another woman, another family, another era. The noose returned with breakfast, but the smell of oatmeal turned my stomach. I pushed the tray away. "Not hungry?" she asked. "I don't think I have the heart for food today." She didn't understand my phrasing, but I did. I had spent decades pouring everything into my sons, and sometime along the way, without noticing, I had emptied myself completely. And now, on a morning when I should have been grateful just to be alive, all I felt was the weight of a truth I could no longer ignore. My sons didn't abandon me last night. They had been abandoning me slowly for years. I just never wanted to see it. I leaned back against the pillow and whispered to myself, "Something has to change."
I didn't realize yet how deep that change would go, but the first crack had already formed. And later that afternoon, a friendly visit from one of my daughters-in-law would shatter the last piece of denial I had left and set the stage for everything I would do next.
By early afternoon, I had convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, someone would walk through the door. Even if not my sons, perhaps one of their wives might at least send a text, a small word, a simple acknowledgement that I existed. I should have known better. At 2:15 p.m., the door swung open and in walked Mara, my eldest son Daniel's wife, impeccably dressed, as always, hair styled, nails perfect, not a single sign that she had hurried from anything or was worried about anyone. She stepped inside with the kind of smile you offer when greeting a neighbor, not a mother-in-law who had nearly died the night before. "Oh, good, you're awake," she said brightly. "I was worried I'd come all this way and find you sleeping." "All this way?" I repeated quietly. The hospital was 10 minutes from her house. She didn't hear the bitterness in my tone, or she ignored it. Either was possible with Mara. She continued, adjusting the strap of her expensive purse. "I couldn't stay long. I have errands to run before tonight's after-event dinner, but I told Daniel someone should check on you, since he's been swamped with cleaning up after last night." Last night. The party that had outranked my life. My pulse crept upward again. She glanced around the room as if inspecting a hotel she might consider giving a 3-star review. "You look better than I expected." "Honestly, from the doctor's call, we thought you were exaggerating again." I stared at her. "Exaggerating?" She nodded casually. "Daniel said you tend to panic whenever you feel unwell, so we assumed it was another one of those moments. And really, doctors always dramatize everything. It's their job to make things seem urgent." I had been clinically dead for almost 3 minutes, but to her it was dramatized. Her words landed like ice on my skin. "You could have died," she added lightly, as if commenting on the weather, "but thank goodness you didn't." The boys would have been devastated and extremely overwhelmed. You know how busy they are. Busy. Always busy. Too busy to care. Too busy to come. Too busy to love. I could feel something shifting inside me. Something dark, heavy, and final. "Mara," I said quietly, "the doctor said I had a major cardiac collapse." She blinked once, uninterested. "People survive those all the time nowadays." "My heart stopped," I added. She waved a hand. "Machines exist for a reason. Anyway, you're alive now, and that's what matters. Speaking of which, Daniel wanted me to ask if you've considered downsizing or moving into some sort of assisted community, something more manageable." There it was, the agenda, the true reason she showed up. "To make sure I'm out of the way?" I whispered. Her polite smile didn't falter. "To make sure you're safe and not relying so much on them. They have their own responsibilities, you know." Responsibilities. But apparently not the responsibility of being sons. A sudden clarity washed over me. Not harsh, not angry, just cold, steady truth. I had been living for people who didn't even consider my life a priority. And if I continued like this, I would die exactly how I lived, quietly, conveniently, and forgotten. "Thank you for coming," I finally said. She seemed relieved. "Of course, I'll tell Daniel you're doing much better. Don't worry, he'll visit when things calm down." When things calm down. When it's convenient. When I'm not dying anymore. She left the room with the same lightly scented breeze she always carried, and for a long moment, I stared at the empty doorway. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even surprised. I was done. Something inside me had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back.
But it wasn't Mara's visit alone that pushed me over the edge. What happened later that evening, when Aaron and his wife finally arrived, would seal my decision in a way nothing else could.
Visiting hours were almost over when I heard hurried footsteps coming down the hallway. Not the kind of rush you make when you're worried, more like the scramble of someone trying not to be the last one to show up. Aaron stepped into the room first, followed by his wife, Delia. Unlike Mara, Delia didn't bother with fake smiles. Her expression instantly told me one thing. She didn't want to be here. "Mom," Aaron said, sounding breathless, "we came as soon as we could." A quick glance at his clothes told a different story. He was still wearing the same outfit he had worn in photos from last night's event, a white button-down and navy blazer, except now slightly wrinkled. His eyes also carried that telltale glaze of someone who'd stayed out late and slept little. "As soon as you could," I repeated quietly. "Yes," Delia cut in before he could answer. "We had an important brunch this morning. His boss was there. Networking matters. But we drove straight here afterward." Brunch. My life-threatening emergency came second to brunch. Aaron pulled up a chair, but it was Delia who spoke again, waving her hands as if trying to shoo away awkwardness. "The doctor said you're stable, so we didn't think it was urgent. And you know how these hospitals are. They always make everything sound worse." Everything? My heart literally stopped twice. Aaron's shoulders tensed. "Mom, please, don't make this dramatic." Delia nodded, as if supporting a logical conclusion. "Exactly. Stress isn't good for you. What's done is done. The important thing is you're fine now." Fine. Fine meant I didn't inconvenience them. Fine meant no one had to leave a party early. Fine meant they could continue pretending nothing was wrong. I breathed slowly, letting the reality settle fully. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad timing. This was who my sons had become. Men whose lives were too full for their own mother. Delia sat down on the windowsill and crossed her arms. "We were talking on the way here about what would be best for you moving forward, and honestly, maybe it's time to think about, long-term arrangements." "Arrangements?" I echoed. "Like assisted living," she said matter-of-factly. "It would take the stress off everyone. You'd have nurses readily available, activities, meals, all of that." Aaron nodded, relieved she had said it first. "Yeah, Mom, it might be a good thing. For you. And for us. For them. Always for them." What neither of them understood was that I wasn't hurt anymore. I was awakening. Their words weren't painful at this point. They were clarifying. Everything they said made my next steps effortlessly clear. I forced a gentle smile. "I appreciate your concern. I'll think about what you've said." They both looked pleased, as if they had just been granted permission to feel guilt-free. After a few minutes of idle chatter about their schedules and an upcoming trip they were planning, they left, with promises so vague they meant nothing. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, I closed my eyes. It was final now. The woman who walked into this hospital dependent on her sons would not be the same woman who walked out. And that night, while the hospital hummed quietly around me, I made the first decision that would change everything. A decision so drastic, my children would never see it coming.
That night, the hospital halls felt quieter than usual. Too quiet, almost. Machines hummed softly, nurses whispered in passing, and Somewhere down the corridor, a television played the late news. But inside my room, something else was happening. I was no longer the same woman who had been wheeled in 2 days earlier. The grief that had once felt like a storm inside my chest had settled into something colder, sharper, more resolute. I reached for the small notepad the nurse had left on the bedside table, the kind hospitals give patients to jot down questions for the doctor. I wasn't planning to write questions. No, I was planning something much larger. I flipped to a clean page and wrote the first line with trembling fingers. I am done begging for people who have already let go of me. For a long moment, I stared at those words. They didn't feel dramatic. They felt true, more true than anything I'd said aloud in years. My life had become a cycle. Give, 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 hope, wait, hurt, forgive, repeat. But this time, my sons had crossed a line to a place there was no return from. Not because they missed the hospital, not because they prioritized a party, but because they genuinely believed I was exaggerating. Because they believed I would never leave. Because they believed I would always be there, no matter how little they were. People only take you for granted when they're certain you'll never walk away. But what if I did? The thought hit me with such clarity that I sat upright despite the ache in my ribs. Leave. Start over. Disappear. For the first time in decades, the idea didn't terrify me. It thrilled me. I took a shaky breath and began writing, really writing this time. Words poured out faster than I could control them, spilling onto the page like water breaking through a dam. It wasn't a letter fueled by rage. It was fueled by truth. I wrote about the years I sacrificed, the dreams I shelved, the life I postponed so they could have theirs. I wrote about the loneliness that their wives mistook for drama, about how they reduced my heart attack into an inconvenience, about how being strong had become my curse. By the time I stopped, my hand was aching, but the weight inside my chest felt lighter, almost airy. A soft knock came at the door. Nurse Leela peeked in. "You're awake?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said, sliding the notepad under the blanket. "Just thinking." She studied my face. "You look different." "I feel different." She smiled warmly. "Whatever it is, I hope it's good for you." She didn't know how right she was. As soon as she left, I pulled the notepad back into my lap. The beginnings of my plan were staring right back at me. Leave. Start new. Cut ties. 3 simple lines. 3 terrifying steps. 3 life-changing truths. I thought about my small savings, money none of my children knew existed. I thought about my cousin in another state who had always said, "If you ever need a fresh start, come to me." I thought about my friend outside the hospital who had offered help more times than my own sons. Then, for the first time, I imagined a life where I didn't exist as mom or grandma or the woman who always fixes everything. A life where I existed just as me. The idea didn't feel like running away. It felt like running towards something. Freedom. But before I could leave, I had to do something far more difficult. Face my sons one last time and hand them the truth they had been avoiding for years.
The next day arrived with a heaviness I could feel in my bones. My pillow was still damp from the few hours of restless sleep I managed. I knew what was coming. The doctor had already told me my sons planned to stop by, not to check on me, not because they were worried, but because appearances required it. Still, I wasn't the same woman who had cried in this bed 48 hours ago. A quiet strength had settled in, a strength born from clarity. By noon, the hallway grew livelier with visitors. I heard laughter echoing from the rooms nearby, people greeting their loved ones, exchanging warm hugs, the kind of sounds I used to dream of hearing from my own sons. At 1:55 p.m., the door creaked open. Daniel entered first. Clean-shaven, confident posture, the kind of calm someone carries when they think they've done nothing wrong. Behind him came Mara, her sunglasses perched on her head like she was going to a brunch instead of a hospital. They looked like a couple visiting a spa, not a recovering patient. A minute later, Erin walked in, followed by Delia, who glanced at her phone even as she stepped inside. The whole room suddenly felt crowded and hollow at the same time. "Mom," Daniel greeted, leaning forward for a quick, polite kiss. "You're looking much better today." Much better? He hadn't seen me at all. "Yes," Mara chimed in. "The color is returning to your face. We knew it wasn't as terrible as they made it sound. The doctor had said I nearly didn't survive." Erin pulled up a chair but didn't sit close. "So you're being discharged soon? The nurse said maybe this week." I nodded slowly. "Yes, that's what they said." "Good," Delia said, crossing her arms. "We can help you look at some options for your living arrangements." Again with the arrangements. "What kind of options?" I asked, though I already knew. "You know, safer housing," Daniel said carefully. "Somewhere with people around who can look after you. Assisted living communities have great amenities nowadays. And it'll take the pressure off all of us. We're constantly juggling schedules. You wouldn't want to feel like a burden." A burden. There it was, spoken aloud, finally. I felt something settle inside me, a calm acceptance, the kind you only find after the truth has crystallized. "I see," I whispered. They continued talking among themselves about renovations in their homes, work dinners, a friend's engagement party, Delia's new business idea. None of it involved me. None of it cared that my world had stopped 2 nights ago. I watched them the entire time, their faces, their easy comfort, their lack of fear, their lack of guilt. They truly believed I would remain in their orbit, waiting patiently, like a fading satellite. When they finally paused, I asked, "What time is your dinner tonight?" Daniel blinked. "How did you know?" "Because your schedule has always been your priority." They didn't understand the meaning behind my words. They exchanged glances, unsure whether I was being emotional or dramatic. "We'll come by later this week," Erin promised vaguely. "Maybe Thursday or Friday." "Of course," I said softly. "I understand." And I did understand, completely. They didn't come to love me. They came to ease their conscience, to check a box, to say they had done their duty. But I didn't feel hurt anymore. I felt free. When they left, I watched the door close. That was the last time they would ever walk out of my life without realizing they were losing me. Because that night, after they were long gone, I would take the first irreversible step towards disappearing, and the letter I wrote would ensure they finally felt everything I had carried alone for years. That night felt different from the others. I wasn't restless. I wasn't pacing the limits of my thoughts. Instead, I felt steady, almost unnervingly calm. It was the kind of calm a person has when they've already made their decision and all that's left is to follow through. Around 8 p.m., Nurse Leela brought in my evening medications and noticed the papers spread across my lap. "You're writing something important," she observed gently. "Yes," I answered, "something I should have written years ago." She didn't pry. Instead, she touched my hand softly. "Whatever it is, I hope it brings you peace." Peace. Such a simple word. Yet it felt like something I had been chasing my entire life. After she left, I picked up the pen again. What I had written earlier wasn't enough. Not for what I needed to say, not for the truth I needed my sons to finally face. So I wrote, and wrote, and wrote. I wrote the things I had swallowed for decades, the guilt, the sacrifices, the invisible wounds. I wrote about the birthdays I cooked for alone, the holidays I spent waiting for calls that never came. I wrote about selling my home, draining my savings, offering pieces of my life, hoping they would offer me a small corner in theirs. I didn't write to hurt them. I wrote so I could finally stop hurting myself. When I finished, my hands were shaking, not from weakness, but from release. The letter wasn't a goodbye. It was a truth I owed myself. I folded it neatly and slid it into an envelope. On the front, I wrote only 2 words: "For my sons." Just writing the words felt like closing a chapter. A few minutes later, Linda, my closest friend, entered the room carrying a thermos of warm soup. She looked tired, but her concern for me softened every line on her face. "How was the visit today?" she asked quietly. I smiled sadly. Eye-opening. She sat beside my bed, and I handed her the envelope. "Linda, I need you to give this to them, but not now, not tomorrow, not until I've already left." Her eyes widened. "Left? Cecilia, are you sure?" "I've been more sure of anything," I said. "Staying here means living in the shadow of people who stopped seeing me long ago. I can't survive in that version of myself anymore." Linda's lips trembled. "Where will you go?" "Away," I said simply. "Somewhere they won't follow. Somewhere I can live the years I have left without begging for love." She held my hand tightly. "If this is what you want, I'll help you. But promise me one thing. Don't disappear from my life too." I squeezed her hand back. "I promise. You're the only person who made me feel human when my own children didn't." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the moment hanging between us but not crushing us. Tomorrow, the doctors would run one final test. By Sunday, my sons planned to visit again. They didn't know that by the time they arrived, they would find an empty bed and a letter waiting in my place. Linda tucked the envelope into her bag gently, like she was carrying something fragile and priceless. And she was. One life was ending tonight. Another would begin tomorrow. But escaping wouldn't be as simple as walking out the door. What happened over the next 24 hours would test my courage, my resolve, and force me to choose between fear and freedom.
The next morning, the hospital felt unusually bright, almost too cheerful for what I was about to do. Sunlight poured across the floor tiles in long golden strips, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted in from the nurse's station. It felt surreal to think that by this time tomorrow, I would be gone. Nurse Clara, the one with the patient eyes, stopped by first. She took my vitals, frowned at the numbers, and asked,
Did something stressful happen yesterday? I smiled softly. No, Clara. Something freeing happened. She didn't understand what I meant, but she patted my hand before leaving. As soon as she was gone, Linda arrived, earlier than expected, with a small rolling suitcase and a determined look on her face. I brought what you asked for, she whispered, placing the suitcase beside the bed. Inside were clothes, toiletries, and the $8,000 I had quietly saved. Money my children didn't know existed. Money they never asked about because they never believed I had any. "Are you ready, Cecilia?" she asked. "I've been ready for years," I replied. But truthfully, readiness felt like a lie. Even now, my heart raced, not from fear of my children, but from the idea of stepping into a life where I couldn't hide behind the role of mother. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Linda sat down. "My cousin can drive us to the bus terminal tonight. After that, it's all you." I nodded, gripping the edges of the blanket. "Have you spoken to your lawyer friend?" "She prepared everything," Linda said. "Your power of attorney, the release forms, the notice for your landlord. Once you're gone, I'll handle the rest." I breathed in slowly. Everything was falling into place. Later that afternoon, Dr. Hale came in for my final evaluation. He didn't know my real plan, only that I seemed steadier. "You're making remarkable progress," he said. "If things remain stable, we might clear you for discharge tomorrow or the next day." Tomorrow. How poetic. He looked up from his clipboard. "Do you have support at home? Anyone who can stay with you after discharge?" The question struck me with a strange mix of sadness and liberation. "No," I admitted, "but I'll manage." He nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes independence is the best medicine. He didn't know how true that was. As the day drifted into evening, the hospital grew quieter. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The intercom buzzed occasionally, and through it all, the suitcase sat by my bedside like a small, solid promise of freedom. At 8 p.m., Nurse Leela entered for her shift and paused when she saw the suitcase. Her eyes softened with understanding. "Are you leaving tonight?" she asked quietly. I smiled. Not officially, but yes. She closed the blinds, dimmed the lights, and said the words that nearly broke me. "You deserve to live a life where you're valued, Mrs. Rowan. Don't look back." Sometimes strangers see us more clearly than our own blood. At 9:45 p.m., Linda returned with her cousin waiting in the parking lot. The hallway was nearly empty. A nurse wheeled by a cart softly humming to herself. The air smelled of antiseptic and something faintly floral. "It's time," Linda whispered. My heart pounded, but not with fear, but with purpose. I placed the letter on the pillow, adjusted the blanket, and looked at the room one last time. This place had witnessed my breaking. Now it would witness my escape. Linda slipped her arm around mine as we walked slowly down the hallway. No alarms, no questions, just quiet steps and the distant hum of machines. When the automatic doors opened and the night air touched my skin, I felt something lift inside me. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward myself. But the real shock wasn't my departure. It was what my sons would discover the next day, when they showed up expecting a fragile mother and found only an empty bed and the truth they never saw coming.
The night bus rumbled softly beneath me as the city lights faded away. I watched them disappear through the window, tiny specks shrinking into nothingness. The farther we drove, the lighter my chest felt, like each mile peeled away another layer of the life I had carried for far too long. My phone buzzed inside my bag. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But closure deserved clarity. I pulled it out. 16 missed calls, a dozen messages, most sent after Linda delivered the letter. I didn't open any of them. I didn't need to. They were too late.
Instead, I turned the phone off and looked out at the dark sky, realizing something important. I wasn't running from my sons. I was running toward the version of myself I lost decades ago. The bus arrived the next morning at a quiet terminal in a different city, one I hadn't visited in nearly 10 years. The air smelled different, fresher, softer. Even the sunlight looked new. Waiting for me near the benches was Eleanor, my cousin, a woman with silver hair pulled into a bun and the warmest eyes I'd seen in years. When she spotted me, she rushed over and wrapped me in a hug that nearly toppled me over. "Cecilia," she murmured, "you look like someone who's been carrying the weight of the world." "I set it down last night," I whispered. She held my face in her palms. "Good, then this is the right place for your next beginning." Her house was small but beautiful, filled with sunlight, soft rugs, and the kind of quiet that felt safe rather than lonely. She showed me my room, a space with pale blue walls and a window overlooking a garden full of blooming lavender. "This is your home now," she said. "Stay as long as you need, or forever if that's what your heart wants." Forever. The word tasted peaceful instead of frightening. Later that day, while drinking tea in her kitchen, my phone, now turned on, lit up with another message, and this time I read it. "Mom, where are you? Please, this isn't funny. We went to the hospital and you were gone. Call us, please. Daniel." Another came seconds later. "We're sorry. We should have been there. At least tell us you're alive. Aaron." I stared at the screen for a long, heavy moment. Not with anger, not with pain, with acceptance. My sons were not bad men, but they were men who had stopped seeing me, and I had stopped seeing myself. Eleanor placed her hand on mine. "Will you reply?" I shook my head. "No, not yet. Maybe not ever." She nodded slowly. "Then let them sit with the silence they created." Days turned into weeks, and I began rebuilding myself, piece by piece. I joined a local garden club, started reading every morning in the backyard, cooked dinner with Eleanor while we laughed like we were young again. I even met new people, neighbors, cafe owners, a widower named Mr. Jensen who lived down the street and insisted on bringing fresh oranges from his tree every Sunday. I wasn't lonely. For the first time in years, I wasn't lonely. My sons continued to send messages that shifted from panic to guilt to anger and finally to silence. I didn't mind. Sometimes healing requires distance. Sometimes distance becomes healing. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Eleanor asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I looked out at the lavender, inhaled deeply, and answered truthfully, "No. If I had stayed, I would have died long before my heart stopped." The wind shifted then, carrying the scent of new beginnings. My story wasn't tragic. It was a rebirth. And in that moment, I understood something deeply. Leaving wasn't losing my family. Leaving was choosing myself. If you were in her place, would you stay and fight for a family that forgot your worth? Or would you walk away to find a life where you finally matter? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious where your heart stands.